All right, good morning and welcome back to the Game Dev Show. We've got a full house today. It should be a lot of fun. We got Greg, Powell, Elon, Andrew, and Story, along with myself. So lots to talk about. And before we get into today's topics, I'm going to introduce our new member here who is first time on the show. You want to introduce yourself, I guess, real quick and say hello, tell everybody who you are and maybe a little bit about the cool stuff you've been doing?
Sure, yeah. I'm Alon Farchi. I work at Virtual Maker. We're a small studio that tries to help game devs by building tools and doing some work. And I'm here because I work on a plugin called Flexalon and also Proxima. These are like, Flexalon is like a 3D layout engine, kind of one of the first of its kind. And it's really like a robust engine that you can use in Unity to lay out content in 3D.
Nice. It looks really cool too. I mean, I've played with it just a little bit. I'm trying to find some projects where I can put it in. I need to get a good project where I have some layout stuff to use it in. But I'm going to drop a link in chat for everybody to go check it out as well. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it later on about going through that process. Because you're not the only one on here who's made assets. I feel like it's probably lots of interesting discussion about how that came about and what that's all like. So yeah, thanks. I'm just glad you're here joining us. And thanks everybody who's here with us live. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and say hello. And if you guys have questions in chat, feel free to ask away. Before we get into, again, the big topics, anybody have anything interesting or exciting they wanted to share this week?
Yeah. I have only one small thing on the Flash deals. In 2 days, there's environment bundle that will be coming with many of our assets in one bundle.
That's on today?
It's in 2 days.
In 2 days, okay. So yeah, check that out. You had a pack on there yesterday. Was it the mountain or the meadow? I've lost track now.
It was mountains.
Mountains. Yeah, so that was on there yesterday. It looks like there's a lot of cool stuff on there. And then I think, Andrew, you've got some stuff coming up later in the sale, right?
Yes, much later in the sale. I think I want to say maybe 29th, like near the end. There'll be the two things on flash deals: the RPG character complete pack, 70% off, $360 package. So that's a big savings. And then I think the low poly Monster Bundle 1, if I'm not mistaken. But right now is still the Projectile Factory for another 5 days is 50% off on the new release discount. So you have to keep your eyes off the shiny spring sale and go over to the new release discount to see that. But it's going well. People seem to very much enjoy it. It's my #1 launch asset ever now, which is really exciting.
Nice.
Folks are very much enjoying it. Lots of new people on the Discord asking about it and getting support. And a couple times I've done live streams with it where I used it myself, of course. And of course, that's always nervous when you demo something live. And then both times, though, it just worked very well, very quickly. And I was like, oh, yeah, that was actually really, really easy. All right, good.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I could see projectiles being really popular too, because it's just something that a lot of people need, and the fact that you've got them in there with a bunch of options and then the integrations with all of the different existing particle packs, I think makes it easy, especially for people who are getting in new and want to do that kind of stuff and just want to get projectiles launching, don't know exactly how to do it. You've got it all set up for them.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's funny because I was already working on this when I started making the integrations, and really I was using the integrations came from just testing it with other and cooler particles, because I'm not good at making particles and most of us aren't. And so I got some from the asset store. Of course, I already have so many from the past many years. And that's when I quickly realized it's a pain in the butt to use all these particles from the asset store because everyone sets it up differently. It's nothing wrong necessarily. Some are doing things probably that they shouldn't be doing, but a lot of them are set up very well. But you still have to do the work, right? You still have to go through and figure out what's what and put them together. And then if you want a unified framework, you have to do that yourself. And so
can you talk a little bit about when you say they're set up differently? I kind of know what you mean, but can you explain for everybody else kind of what that means?
So I think the most straightforward way to set up a particle let's say any general projectile that's going to shoot is going to have three parts. The thing that shoots, let's say a fireball or an arrow or a bullet, the thing that hits the impact particle, whether it be sparks or an explosion or whatever you want, something that happens when it hits, and then something happens when it fires. So a muzzle flash or something along the lines. The best, easiest, most straightforward way to set that up is with those three particles, and then throw on a sound, an audio source on the impact and the muzzle, and if you want some like whizzing sound as the thing goes flying away on that, and then you've got the sound. It's just you just press play, you instantiate them. For the one that moves, you instantiate, and it's very straightforward. You just make it move, you instantiate the collision on collision. It's very straightforward. Some are set up like that. Others are set up that in a way that requires their own scripts to work, where if you change anything in the script, it just doesn't work. It won't play. It doesn't preview in the particle system because it's like a new, different way of doing particles that's unique to theirs. And you need to look through their code and understand what their code is doing. And often their code isn't really well organized. It's not commented. It's using abbreviations.
And it like requires a start point and an end point or a direction, some variables that you've got to set up to make that thing fire off, right?
Yep. It requires a lot of that. There is one great particles. And again, these particles are all really great, but there's one in particular that had the names of every projectile from their package hard coded into the script itself, meaning you really just can't use their script. And so all of this, like, the integration is not just setting up some basic projectiles with behaviors that look cool and just let you drag and drop it and move on with your life, but it's really extracting the content, the particle content from all the very opinionated code and tightly coupled bits on these other things. And I'll tell you a story. Arcanor VFX is my favorite one to integrate so far because they've been the easiest ones to integrate. And those packages have tons of content. Those are huge particle packages, and they're very nice, come with sounds and everything. And the most recent one I integrated, he had changed the way he had done his audio. So suddenly he had a custom script on the audio that destroyed that. First, it created the audio object during runtime, which means it's not being pooled, it's creating a new thing, and then it destroys it when it hits. So I'm like, oh no, this means that it doesn't work with the projectile factory, which does pool everything and expects things to just kind of be there available. And this one's instantiating and destroying. I'm like, uh-oh. So I caught he reset. Honestly, I just was trying to do something. I'm not a coder, and that's the root of it. A lot of particle people aren't coders, so they create something that works, but it doesn't necessarily work the best way it could work. So I rewrote the script for him. I don't know if he'll use it, to be much more flexible, to be open to all the methods are virtual, so that if someone like me comes in, they can be like, okay, that's fine. I can just override the start, make it happen in awake and not start. That way I can turn it on and off and the sound will always play. I can cache the object so that it doesn't keep having to be instantiated. Polygon Arsenal is the one I've been integrating next. And so it's fine. And I actually wrote a script before I even talked to him that converted everything just to be a more traditional workflow. And it was really just adding one script that would automatically convert everything on validate. So I was fine. But that was one of those things where it's like, oh, if you come into this package, you'd be like, great, I want to use it. But now you find, oh shoot, because of this one script, now I have to do, a fair amount of work in order to migrate all of these to my own system. So I'm hoping that people feel that the projectile factory is their one system, the system that they decide, I want to use the system because it works. It's uniform. Every spawner that produces any kind of projectile can use the exact same language, the exact same methods, the exact same projectiles, the exact same observers that connect your code to the projectile, so you can do damaging and other things like that. And once you have that unified, it's a lot easier to just make things work.
Yeah, so it'd be like the default system. Oh, I just realized my face has disappeared. So it'd be like the default particle or projectile system for games. Yeah. No, I think it's a great plan and a good idea. And now you got me looking at these magic missiles.
Yeah.
So looking at Iraq, these guys. Yeah, okay. As I say, I'm pretty sure this is in my project already. Yeah, and I just went and looked at it. It is. I thought I was using a couple of those already.
Yeah, and the integrations basically mean like if I integrate magic missiles, I haven't yet, but if I do, and all the integrations are listed on the Projectile Factory page on the asset store. They're all free. If you have the particles and you have Projectile Factory, you bring in the integrations, and then there's just projectile objects that you can just bring onto your spawner, and they'll just work.
Now, can you explain how you did that too? Is that just that you made prefabs with those object references, and then if people have, they import those packages, they import your prefabs, so they're going to link up to those prefab or those other object references, assuming they don't move and rename them or whatever from their original folder?
Yeah, exactly that. Just, the whole goal for most, if a package on the asset store is done well, you don't have to modify anything. You can expand on it without modifying it, right? Because you really shouldn't modify it. You shouldn't have to. You can move the folders around for these particles if you are reorganize it, but don't move the stuff in the folder. Don't rename things. Don't copy an object and think that it's going to work. But yeah, so basically the integrations are just empty prefabs. They have references to my scripts in Projectile Factory, the projectile script itself. And all the behaviors that are assigned to them and whatnot. And they have references to all the particles and textures and other things in the materials and sounds in the particle packages. And so if you just bring in the integrations, you're just going to get errors and empty shells that don't do anything at all. Maybe there'll be one particle system component or two that spawn out pink bits because of the textures or materials. So you really do need to have both. But it just means that once you do have both, you don't have to go through the process of doing those updates. You can just start using them right away. And it literally is like you import the 3 packages. Assuming you already have projectiles set up in your project and you just want new ones, import the particles, import the integration, drag those onto your spawner and click play, and it's spawning it. And they'll have default behaviors and stuff already attached. And you can, of course, easily change those behaviors if you want.
I do have a curveball to throw you.
Yeah.
So this is just me, again, thinking as a consumer, what I would want or what I would make for myself. A very common use case is someone buys an asset pack like that, and they look at the pattern or process that the developer has created, and they're like, cool, I like these. This is how they do rockets, but I actually need 6 rockets for my tower defense game. And so they copy the rocket file, they make their own prefab, they modify things, and so on. So I don't know if it's in your plans, but something I would recommend is the series of steps you took to convert a prefab from pack A into pack B is most likely add this extra script, drag reference from here into here, set these values up and modify these values. You can turn that into commands, like right-click property commands you could do. You could even hard code the directory structure if it matches theirs or whatever. And so the point would be you'd be able to allow someone to right-click a prefab and say, make supported in my system. And that would not only work for people who, if there's new additions added that you haven't gotten time yet to modify to, but also allow the person who's made their own changes to basically follow the steps. And it doesn't always have to be correct, but it at least gives someone a path to say this is probably what you should do to be able to convert one to the other.
I do have a couple of helper scripts in the menu that will do some of the most common stuff. Like, for instance, once you have a collision particle, something that you want to spawn on collision, you have to create a new object that has the correct behavior on it. So the collision behavior, basically. And so that one has a little helper. You can select all of them at once, click that button, and they'll all be converted into that. And then you can just drag them to the right folder and you're ready to go. So there's a few of those. I'll talk to you more offline, maybe on to dig deeper, just because a lot of the conversion is that whole removing of custom scripts and kind of reworking things, and sometimes even extracting various bits of the particles. So they're
no, I get you, and I know that there's a lot of manual stuff in it, but one thing that is at least usually good is when a person, no matter who they are, settles on a method, they usually follow the same method, which means they'll always name the sub-object collision or spawn or whatever, and there'll always be a certain hierarchy relationship, or there'll always be some level of I put this script with these names and you have to fill in all the children in here. If you can extract the set of rules that built that you can literally write a add component menu or a right-click menu that will say, check prefab if child has child name this and this, or comes from folder with, company name underscore. I can presume it's probably following this pattern, and you can just run through it and do those steps in code, and then you could basically like follow the steps and spit out a prefab that now matches your new formatted structure.
Do you think
Again,
that
it won't solve every case, but
And then Arcanor goes and uses a new script for their audio files and ruins it all.
Yeah, oh no, that's going to happen. Certainly, it's not going to be a win in all cases. I'm just trying to figure out what would, because I guess it comes down to who your audience is. As obviously the plug and play value is really good, but if I was doing my own version or there was new additions and I had to try and fix it myself, if my solution is the developer haven't supported that, I'm like, oh god, okay, I'm gonna have to learn how he does any individual changes, and I don't know how to even go there. But if I had a right-click menu that previously used to convert A to B, and even if it doesn't right now, I can look at the steps that system used to do, compare it against what it should do, and you've at least given me a path to not bother you to fix it. But if those steps aren't there, there's because you've built them, but you haven't got that like demarcated structure of how did you get from A to B. But by even just codifying it, gives someone like me a way to go, maybe I don't need to bother the dev, because sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes it's too much work for me to bother you, to wait for you to get back to me, and then all of a sudden it's like I could just do this myself. And so if I have some threads of like this is the process, I'll just do it myself.
Makes sense.
So as a note on that, Dustin really likes your documentation.
Okay.
You could read the documentation straight from the page before even buying it, which is, I think, super handy. It definitely gives me like a good feeling when I can go through and see exactly how everything works and what that looks like. Oh, is this the documentation right here?
Documentation right there. That's
nice.
It's currently the link goes to the quick start guide where there's videos and text documentation on how to quick start, which, by the way, I follow myself because I often will forget the steps when I go to do it, and then I'll go through, and that's why I'm like, oh yeah, that worked. Okay.
Yes.
It's exactly
that's handy. Nice. Do you do that for your tools like Flexlon and stuff? Do you set up external docs with a quick start guide?
Yeah, there's docs for sure. There's a whole website dedicated to it. As far as quick start, I've got like templates and things like that you can use, and samples, of course, in the package.
I'm curious about your experience with integration and stuff, because I mean, your assets are a little bit different, so it's not like you specifically need to integrate with like art things or anything. But do you guys do any type of integration with other assets, or can you just talk maybe a little bit about what the different assets are that you built and what they are, so get everybody familiar real quick?
Sure. So the way Flexlon works is at a core, it's a layout engine. So what it does is it says, okay, given a set of boxes, essentially, how am I going to arrange these boxes in 3D? And so the real question is, how do you determine the sizes of boxes of things? And then how do you integrate that result that you had of the layout with anything else? And so the way that it determines the boxes is through this special layer we call adapters, where it says, okay, given you can code it yourself, but there's a bunch of built-in ones of saying, okay, if it's a 3D model, the size is the bounds of the model. If it's a text, it is the size of the text. And this changes depending on how you configure things. Like, do you want it to scale with the width? Do you want it to, reflow in the height? Things like that. And so once you could determine, okay, here's the size of the thing using this adapter, then Flexlon does all the work to figure out, okay, how do you lay this out in the various different patterns that are available? And of course, you can write your own patterns. And finally, after you've done that, okay, how do you actually get the objects into that position? So then there's a set of transform updaters or animators that'll let you say, okay, I want this to lerp towards its target position. I want it to follow some curve, things like that. So it's really designed to be flexible. And so you can hook into any of these endpoints to change how the thing is sized, how the thing is laid out, and then how the thing is animated to that position. And there's also integrations with some interaction. So at the very beginning of that video, you saw the hand picking up the 3D objects and moving them from one layout to another. There's a whole it's a pretty lightweight, but it's an interaction system that helps you move things from one layout to the other and drag them around. But when you're talking about something like VR, the VR system that you're using, whether it be XR Toolkit or something for Meta, they want to handle, how to move things around, make it sure it's smooth and connect it to your hand and everything. So there's points there of integration of saying, okay, Flexon's going to do the layout part of this, but we're going to hand off the motion to the other framework.
Oh, okay. You actually do have to do some integration there too. That's interesting. I hadn't even thought about it. It makes a lot of sense in VR stuff now that I'm thinking about it, because it's always been a problem for me when I was trying to set things up, getting stuff organized, and because you just set things down, people just throw shit randomly and objects in random spots, and I'd always just snap them. But this seems like it'd be much better for that. Story, have you used something like this, or have you actually used Flexon before?
I have not used Flexon, but back in the early days of VR, I very much tackled a lot of these kinds of things in smaller ways. Like I didn't build a cohesive unit out of it, but yeah, it's one of those things with a deceptively large amount of complexity. Even that example on screen now with the curve, you're like, cool, I can have objects, I can have a curve, I can have points and distribute along curves. But wait, I have a different number of objects and control points in my curves, so I have to redistribute along the curve, but the curve is going to be denser at certain points, so I have to equidistant distribute. So I know that even just like a small example like that, you're going to have a whole pile of different problems. And then on the VR thing, I had the same issues where some of the elements are dynamic as well. Like the hands and stuff will spawn objects at playtime that you won't have access to for hooks to grab into various things, because the way they tend to do physics is if you parent things, it doesn't work exactly as you'd like because of the whole way that the hand is moving differently than physics. So you often have an invisible control object that has some sort of interpolation that allows you to do, and you don't want that to mess with your systems. And yeah, I've been down many of these rabbit holes before, and so I can respect the complexity of the problem to solve. But it's very powerful. The thing that I actually had trouble with, weirdly as it sounds, is it's very hard to explain why this is valuable to people. It is in like a multitude of ways outside of the obvious lay stuff out, but there's a lot of stuff to do with layouts that are very compelling for other use cases. Like we did carousel menu type selection stuff. I used the exact same type of system for telekinesis at one stage, where I had a ring of telekinetic objects you could throw, and then as you'd throw them, they'd sort of pool from this list of your inventory. So your inventory was like an orb of objects, and you'd remove one and you could throw it. And then as you collected stuff on the ground, they'd reintegrate into the sphere, and the sphere would like reshape relative to the number of items. So you had all these really fun visual representations that's effectively an array of vector target positions, and then all of the math that goes with it, which then gets even further compounded because if you're trying to lay objects out separately, you've got differences between, am I using the renderer to represent the scale or the box collider, or am I using a compound of positions and then I try to build a compounding box around those objects to house them, and then are they equidistant between those? And we haven't even gotten to the idea of having weighted growth, or the idea that different elements could contain a different percentage weight across that. So if I have 3 objects, maybe I want one to represent 2/3 of the bounding perceptions region. It's a big complicated set of things. So I'd be curious to see how some of those are tackled.
Yeah, I mean, VR. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, VR is kind of my background, and so when I was thinking a lot about building UI, I had this constant problem of I want to build UI that doesn't look flat and boring in VR. So this is where like the problem originally came from. How do you if you just want a button that you can push and it's 3D, and you want to position it in the same way that you might position it on an HTML page or something, there is no tool to do that until now, right? You need a way to bring some of those layout capabilities from the 2D world to the 3D world, so you can get these kind of predictable behaviors.
What's one of the most non-obvious but interesting use cases for this?
Non-obvious.
Well, I'll give you one that we used it for. Was growing vines across the surface. We literally like paint a bunch of dots along a surface, and we'd treat that as like an animated series of dots, and then we could have something animate along that on the spline curve, and it would effectively grow this vine that would be part of a gameplay mechanic. That was one we did. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of these cases are obvious when you start hitting the problems. So like, there was a client I worked with that they wanted to build a kind of just a bookshelf, and they wanted the user to be able to rearrange things on that bookshelf. And it becomes a really hard problem when you start thinking about, well, there's different size books, and there's you always want to constrain, that the user doesn't just take the book and leave it off the shelf. There's all these like little pieces to it, but Flexon makes it super easy to solve that problem.
One of the bits in the video looked like an army of little guys being formed into different units. So would this be a good asset for an RTS type thing where you want to say, okay, I've selected 30 things, form them into this shape?
Yeah, so it's easy to take the shapes that are built in and just use them. I think it'd be more interesting to see if people can come up with, because there's only so much you can do with the fixed number of shapes. So if you wanted a real army kind of system of saying, okay, I've got arbitrary number of characters and I want to arrange them and they should follow these patterns. It's really about, can you write the algorithm to say, okay, given the objects, where should they go? And then Flexon will deal with all the complexity of saying, okay, I want additional spacing between the objects. I want to size how big the objects are. I want to animate them into place or whatever. So you can do a combination of using what's built in and then using your own stuff.
How do you define those shapes?
So you have to do it in code. So you write a layout. You implement you inherit from a base class, and you write the layout. And you basically write two methods. You say, how am I going to measure the size of my layout based on the objects? And then how am I going to arrange them? And if you implement those two methods correctly, and there's a bunch of samples of how to do that, then you get all the magic Flexon. You can nest the layouts, you can animate things, you can interact with them, and so on.
Again, because it seems I threw a curveball at Andrew. I thought I'd ask you the same thing. I'm just pure curiosity, and I'm just. Have you tried implementing any kind of like DSL into this in terms of how you define those? For an example of what I mean, a common part of Stable Diffusion in the automatic 1111 version of doing this sort of division of a scene, the idea being that I have a picture and I want to separate, there's the sun, there's a tree, there's an owl sitting on the tree. How do you define the bounding rectangles for each of those in ways that could be in the same way? They could scale that this represents 2/3 of a screen, that represents an inner component that has a weight of whatever. They use their own DSL for that, which admittedly is god awful, but it's a definitive set of like 0, 0, 0, 1, whatever they do for theirs. And I won't bore people with explaining how their absolutely nonsense one works. But the point is, you can define layouts at the end of the day are a definition of parent-child relationship plus some weighting. You can define those with some structural format and then load it and unload it. I'm just curious if it's always in code or if you have some kind of layer that sort of allows you to serialize out or structure that in some way.
So the P0 for Flexon was to get it into editor rod. So because people can then see the objects, see them laid out, and mess with them the way they're used to. But you're stopped on the screen here with Flexon Copilot. This is a AI tool I was working on, I'm still working on, that lets you generate 2D UI layouts. And to generate something like that, we're using LLMs. And so you need some sort of text format for the LLM to generate. And so I started off coming up with my own DSL and for basically defining what a Unity UI would look like plus Flexon. And that was actually quite difficult to do. There's a lot of little nuances that go into that. And so I ended up falling back on saying, okay, let's start from something that's known, HTML, and see if we can convert that into something in Unity. So if anybody's interested in a HTML to Unity converter, let me know, because we were debating if we should ever release something like that.
Oh yeah, if anybody wants that in chat, say something now.
Or you'll never get it.
Speak up. So there were a couple questions in chat I wanted to get to, but before we do, I wanted to make sure that I asked Greg about this new video that he did, because I don't know if he's going to be around much longer or going to have to leave soon, just because of time. But yeah, anyway, Greg, the new Legends of Learning video, what's going on there? Is that game, can you give us an update?
Yeah, so I basically have all the functionality of the gameplay done, and I'm polishing now and doing some testing. And so I haven't been doing very many videos lately. And I started a series on making games for Legends of Learning. The first one was just a basic introduction to how you go up to their website and you look at their spreadsheet of learning objectives and pick one that you'd like to make a game for. and then they'll send you a template where you can basically write a game design document and pitch your idea to them, and then they approve it. You basically get 7 weeks to make a game, and they give you access to their developer portal, and you can download. It has all the instructions for how to download their package and stuff. So the second video, the one I put up yesterday, is basically that process. If you're creating a new game in Unity, you know, what the requirements are, like what version of Unity you have to use, the different WebGL settings you need to configure to work with their platform, how to import their package, and then use their test harness to make sure that your game is behaving like it should within their platform. The next one, I'm going to talk about how you navigate the different game states that they support. Basically, they have an API where you can, you know, say, this is my progress in the game. You know, this is the max progress. This is my current progress. This is the current score. Anything you want to save via JSON, you can make as part of that payload. And that way you can give your players the ability to start a new game or pick up where they left off. And so when a teacher assigns a game to a student, you know, they can save it partway through and come back and pick it up later and that sort of thing. So I'll cover that in the next video. And then, but mainly for my game, I'm just in the process of doing some polishing and optimization. And I have until May 1st to submit it to them for review.
Okay. Like 10, 12 more days of polish.
Yeah. Well,
nice.
Yeah. Hopefully not that long, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've got up to that long, right? To polish.
That's right. That's right.
To make it shiny. Nice. So that's awesome. It'd be really cool when it comes out and everybody can get in there and all the kids can play it and see how it does. I think it's really cool.
And I was going to tell Alon, I could have used that asset in this game. I had to write my own 3D horizontal layout group, basically. So in my game, it's a math game where you have basic multiplication and division, and I'm using that Toon Numbers asset that I know Jason is familiar with. So the
really
possible, cool. So the possible answers are these animated Toon numbers, and they're all laid out, you know, in a line, like a parade line, dancing around or whatever. And so I had to write my own component basically to arrange them horizontally, sorted by, you know, numerically. And so I definitely could have used your asset for that.
Yeah, it could have been handy. Get them aligned better so they're not all equidistant, even though like half the numbers are a lot fatter than the other ones.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have the same sorts of issues and they end up writing something and they first think, well, it's going to be simple. And then over time, the complexity grows as they're trying to implement it. And so this is just a way to save it.
Yeah, I had exactly the same problem. Like I said, I started with placing objects. Then I made something called a point distributor. And then I made a point generator that would generate points to be distributed upon. Then I made point walkers that would then walk generated points. And then I had all of these subsets of like sphere points. And I basically did build my own ridiculous system, but it was like, because it was just for me, I never bothered going too far in terms of like making, because at the end of the day, my actual use cases was I was just throwing some objects around in VR. And so I never had much past that point.
Oh, that's awesome. There are lots of people having to solve the same problem. That's why the assets exist, right? Get rid of those problems, just like Andrew's projectiles. So yeah, let's jump in. There are a couple questions here, and just looks like there were 4. I'll just start in order. The first one was just about how to get a first job as a developer, what games are good to make solo to have a good resume. I don't know that making a game solo necessarily is the best way to get into the game industry. I think that making game projects and learning how to make games is certainly good, but like building any one specific game isn't necessarily going to get you a game dev job. It's much more about the networking, learning the skills, and being able to present yourself as able to do the job and get the project done or get the part of the project done that they want. Like if you going out and just building a game hoping that it's a huge success and then or good enough to like push the resume past that, I feel like is not the right way to go about it. You guys kind of, I assume, generally agree. What would you do if you were going to get a job right now and you had no game dev experience at all?
I would take Rick Davidson's How to Land a Job in a Video Game Industry course on GameDev.tv.
It's a good idea. Yeah, it's super cheap, and he's very good at giving the correct advice on getting an actual job. Because getting a job, it's not just about like having a great resume or a great portfolio piece. Those things definitely help, and they help you get in on some of the jobs that are harder to land. But getting your first game dev job doesn't have to be a super complicated process. It has to be one that's, I think, specific though. You've got to actually work on the job part of it, not necessarily the making my own fun indie game part of it. Oh, there's a link right there. Let's go check.
There is this idea. I mean, if you're going to go into an interview, and it can't be a bad thing to say, by the way, here are some games I've developed and published, and you can get them now on iOS or whatever. Just to show, look, I do actually make stuff. I can do it. In addition to all this other stuff that you're looking for. But in that regard, I would say it doesn't necessarily, the best games are the ones you actually finish then in that regard. Don't do an MMORPG.
No, yeah, definitely build little things that you can finish. But also, and there's some follow up to this too, is that a lot of companies want a resume, even if you're good, they won't contact you if you don't have a good resume. Obviously, having a good resume is important, but sending out just blind resumes to companies and applying is like the hardest way to get a job too. If you're just like going out and applying on all of the job application websites, like that's it's the easiest default thing to do, and when you do that, you're going up against hundreds of other people that are doing the same thing, and in that case, they're just comparing resumes. You should follow, I think, some more of the advice that Rick gives, which is really just making some direct contacts at the place that you're actually interested in, trying to actually solve some problems and put forward something that you've done that solves the problems that they're having there, or that is somewhat related to the thing that they're working on. If they're working on a specific type of game, you build a little mini game that you think would go good into that, and then show them that kind of thing. And Rick goes, I think, kind of in depth into it, and he's done plenty of talks. If you don't have money for the course, he's done plenty of talks on it on even on my YouTube channel. I've done interviews with him about it. So just search for Rick Davidson, get a job on YouTube, and you'll find lots of good info on there. But it's really about more making these direct connections and making industry connections than just blindly applying, because you're way more likely to get a job if you know somebody than if you have a great resume. Like knowing somebody just even loosely 1,000 times more useful than a great resume.
And to expand on that, something that Rick Davidson told me was, don't limit yourself to job postings, but if you see a company and a team that you'd really like to work for, reach out to them directly, even if they don't have a job posting, and maybe even write. He talks about creating an artifact. So, design a level that, for their game, or a character, or if you're a graphic designer, create some art that you think they could use in their game, and then reach out and just say, hey, I made this piece of art, I think would go good in your game or whatever, and just try and make contacts that way. And he also said, be willing to offer to like intern, or, even do some volunteer work to start, or even apply for a job that's not necessarily game dev initially, like be a tester or something, just to get in the door. And then maybe you'd have an opportunity to say, well, I kind of tricked you to get in the door, but I'm also a really good level designer, or I'm really good, software engineer or whatever.
Yep. I got my first game dev job doing QA stuff, and I literally started just writing tools for QA and then started writing tools for design. And yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, let's go on to the next question though, that was not job related. More important, how do I get a girlfriend as a game developer?
You don't. I mean, isn't developing games your girlfriend? That's
you just make her, right? You code her.
Yeah, it's the thing you focus all your life on, so you're done.
Anybody got an AI link to go find your
Oh gosh,
AI girlfriend? So anybody got advice? My only advice here would be don't just go around telling girls that you're a game dev, because that not the most appealing or attractive thing. Don't talk too much about video games to them. At least not until you've already caught them and married them or something. Yeah, then
I was going to say, I would get the opposite advice.
Do the opposite. Do the opposite. Talk about it in advance. Show a picture of your board game shelf, because in the end, you want to be with somebody who appreciates your board game shelf and wants to play those games with you. Otherwise, you're going to be in for week after week of frustration when they're like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I disagree. I said just trick them first. Don't let them know just how nerdy you are, and then slowly ease them into it. My wife would have never in the beginning board games, but now she loves board games. We got a whole giant collection of them. It was very slow. But the first time I brought home a board game, she was like, "What the fuck? You spent how much money on a board game? We have Monopoly." Like, oh. But yeah, and now she loves them and she's all into it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have any other good girlfriend getting advice. I was talking to a guy last weekend about, he was talking about how dating nowadays is extremely difficult. He was much younger, and he's apparently it's nearly impossible for him to find dates that aren't just online. I have no idea what that's like. It's been way too long. Let's go on to, unless you guys have other dating advice.
My only thing I'll say is,
let's go back to girlfriends.
People like being around fun people. Just be someone that you would enjoy spending time with. And two very simple ones, if you want a really basic thing, is you have your hobbies. Crazy enough, they might have theirs. So maybe ask about those as well. And for the love of God, if there's one advice I can give anyone, and I've seen this happen too many times, don't quiz people. If they say they like a thing, don't start going down the, oh yeah, prove it, because you'll find yourself instinctively going down that road. And what to you sounds like fun banter is often the kind of thing that'll make any girl's eye roll and go, oh, he's one of those guys again, and then immediately walk away. So just talk to people. That's it.
I will say though, if a potential partner says, I like board games, do ask, oh, what kind of games have you enjoyed recently? And if they say something like Monopoly or one of the other standard games, run away. They don't know what a board game is.
Book recommendation for talking to girls the first time. If you're not sure what to do.
That is actually a really good book. I think most people need to read it. Yeah. And here's my brutally honest opinion. People who've told me they've read that book have clearly not internalized that book. Don't just read it, think about it.
Actually, and read it more than once.
Yeah. Because it's one of those, because at the time it's very easy to read the book and go, oh yeah, he's basically describing empathy, but in like a structured manner. It's like, yeah, but it's not just about reading the words. It's about actually going, no, you will succeed in more social interactions if you actually care for the person's well-being. You don't just pretend to, you just put yourself in the mindset where you actually can. Suddenly everything becomes a lot easier, and you don't need all of the 10x collections of tricks and whatever. You just learn to engage with people in real time, and that tends to magically solve everything else. So
yeah.
So Andrew, does Scrabble count?
I mean, depends. If you like Scrabble, I don't like Scrabble. So yeah, I that's one that I can't.
It's
play.
more if they go to it. Like I think that, to Andrew's point, if I say to somebody I like board games, then I'm basically saying I know what Catan is. I know how to, I know Resistance. I know if they say that and then follow it up with the board games like everyone else plays, like we're not really talking about the same thing. Yeah. It's fine to say you like Scrabble and stuff, but if their gambit is to open with that and then respond with stuff that doesn't qualify, it's like saying I like video games, and then all they talk about is like they played one game on their phone 10 years ago. It's like it's not about gating. It's just like we're not going to be in the same lane if that's what we're talking about. Yeah.
I will say I found, and it wasn't me who found it. Speaking of dating, it was somebody I met there found a nerd cafe, not half an hour from me, that is Lord of the Rings themed, has beholders and dragon heads on the wall. Every drink and sandwich is a fun name and tells you how much mana you get back when you drink it. And they have a bunch of board games there. So I met somebody there, and this person likes board games, as one might expect. So if you are looking for that, I think somebody else, Love Something Labs, who of course knows all about Lovebird Labs, knows all about it. Join a social group, go to a place where you think you would enjoy going and find people there that are there.
And I will say those kinds of meetups are really good for meeting new people. Some people find it awkward in bars and things, social anxiety or whatever. From my experience, game dev meetup stuff, like there's a board game meetup thing somewhere around here for me. And it's actually a really great place because people who are foreign nationals, they're going to have a hard time if they're not fluent with the language. They want a way to sort of still meet people and hang out. And so joining board game groups, you can easily sit people down and teach them a very simple game and work together. So I found that there's a lot of really good sort of easing people in both book clubs and those sort of game clubs. And then people like myself who are more talkative can easily like help people along. You can spot who's more uncomfortable or help people or get people talking to each other. So yeah, if you're looking for a place to hang out and meet people, I find book club meetups and board game meetups are actually a really great place to,
Now, how do those do for girlfriend count, though? I mean, is it 9 to 1 guys to girls like most game dev meetups that I've been at?
I'm not going to lie, I haven't really counted. And the one I go to in particular was in a bar, and so it's 50-50-ish.
Oh, okay. So a little bit more even. All right. Let's unless anybody else has more girlfriend advice, we'll go on to the next one. Anybody got anything else?
Yeah, this is not the episode I thought we'd have. That's
I mean, it's a little bit like a video game. It's not quite like Leisure Suit Larry. Don't go that route, but choose your own adventure.
Just don't be a dick and be okay with being wrong even when you're right. Right? Like it's okay. Being right is not that important. All right, let's go on to the next question. So how do you serialize a list of scriptable objects? For example, inventory has items that are scriptable objects. I understand I have to do an ID or GUID lookup, but how do I go about that? Does the GUID change on the scriptable objects? What should I do? So what's your guys' approach for this? I have my own, but say you've got items that are defined in your game. Maybe it's an RPG. Let's for this example, say there are 1,000 items, right? And they're maybe all scriptable objects, and your player can pick those up. I just picked a random number that was somewhat big, so we don't come up with too simple of an example. How would you guys go about saving that data off for the player? Assume this is local saving and we're not on a server or anything. Anybody want to take it first?
So I need to understand the question a bit more. Is this more about saving the player's state?
It sounds like it, like saving off their inventory, so that like they have an inventory that has items that are scriptable objects. So I assume scriptable objects are defining the items, and let's just assume that they've got 1,000 plus of them. So that's a bigger case scenario. How do you guys prefer to save this for? So I assume it's just like a single player game.
So for Game Modules 4, the way we do that in Game Modules 4 for the inventory and the items and anything else you want to save, every scriptable object has its own unique ID, UID, which it uses the GUID system to format it, but it's basically just a unique ID that gets assigned when you create it. And that's the scriptable object. Every instance of it in the game gets a game ID. So because you might have 2 swords, each sword might have the same UID because it's based on the same scriptable object that's main item, and you're not trying to serialize that. You're just serializing a reference to that using this UID. But the in-game version, which might be enchanted or damaged or who knows what other things you're doing to it, and you want to serialize that, that's going to have an in-game unique ID too. So a game ID. So every in-game object has 2 IDs, one for itself, one for its parent, and then all the other things that you're trying to save. So for example, in game modules, all the attributes, something like dirty or damaged or of fire or whatever, those are all scriptable objects as well. So you're really just saving their unique IDs, saying these are all the attributes on this thing, here's the unique IDs. So you're just serializing those, and then you can easily recombine them at runtime into the thing that you want to show your players.
Oh, and for those IDs, those are ones that you're generating yourself, right? Not the built-in GUIDs that could change, like they're kind of mentioning in the question.
I use that system because you can use that system. Do we use it at runtime? Is that a runtime thing? One way or another, we use that system for the main UIDs, and for the GUID, for the game IDs, I think we do the same thing because it's runtime capable.
You just do GUID.new GUID.
Yeah.
And create your own, right?
Like the chances of it being something that already exists is,
You need some sort of singleton or service that stores all these objects you care about, and some way for them to register themselves, so that you can do that lookup once you have deserialized the data.
Yes, that's actually a good point. I forgot that we do have a there's a built-in, I think it's a scriptable object that just, you don't have to bring into your project. It just automatically updates and it keeps track of everything. And so it is that connector piece. Yeah, you need that too.
So it's essentially just a table or a dictionary of IDs to scriptable objects.
Yeah, IDs to objects, and the game module, since we have our own dictionary structure that it can include things like textures and sprites and things that you can't serialize for that reason. So this table automatically links those as well. So you can so the dictionaries will reconnect at runtime the first time that they're called. Yeah, because you can't serialize a reference to the object. You need another thing that has a reference that doesn't change.
Yeah. Anybody have a different solution that you use?
I don't serialize scriptable objects.
Well, you're not serializing scriptable objects. You're serializing the reference to which scriptable object it is, which item it is, the ID.
That's true, but I mean, I don't want to get super philosophical here, but I think that's a very, very big distinction. It's like saying, do you save mono behaviors? No, because there's a whole lot of crap in there you don't want. Do you save scriptable objects? No. The way I look at it is a scriptable object is a YAML file. It is a serialized thing with data in it. And then your game has stuff that changes. And so what I would save is the stuff that changes. And
I think that's what Andrew was saving, though, is he's saving the IDs of the objects in there and just the deltas after that, right? Am I misunderstanding? I thought he was saving the scriptable object GUID, which has the base info, and then any additional change stuff on top of that with the game item, and that's serialized out, but that's not a scriptable object, right? That's just a JSON serialized class or something.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, but I guess my point is that the answer is, to me, that doesn't matter, because I could save it in a LightDB, in SQLite, in JSON. I could save it as a series of bytes in a sequence. The answer is whatever you can spit out, whatever you can read back in. And I can't give a direct answer, because like if I was storing an inventory of items in a shop game where you could build 1 million items, I would use LightDB, because it's much easier to build lots of really quick, fast BSON files. If I was building a data set which lets you scrape countries from the world and do sort of like place buildings and have a big combat thing, I'd probably store a local SQLite database version of it that would synchronize with the server and keep the local stuff fast, but then do any updates from the server. If I was just doing a game with some character state and objects and some things in a collection, depending on how dynamic it is, I would either just save it out into my own JSON file, or again, I might use SQLite. I'd probably use DBLite, because it has an ability to have documents with nested JSON sub-elements. And so it's really quick to have a parent-child relationship. It depends entirely. And so I guess my point is, it doesn't really matter too much.
I would say let's look at that example specifically. So because I think that this use case was like RPG items, probably 1,000-ish items max. Greg, you got to get going. We'll see you next week, Greg. It was great having you again. Thanks, everybody. Go check out Greg's channel. Everybody. Link in the description. Right. But yeah, so in this scenario, so say there's like 1,000 items, player goes and picks up, maybe they got an inventory space of 100 or whatever. In that case, you're saying either JSON file, which sounds kind of similar to his, or LightDB is the other option.
Yeah, so the reason why I say LightDB specifically is the thing about JSON file storage is it's perfectly fine, but it's a file with all of your data that you then read serially in a row. 1,000 items, just read it in memory at the start of the game and you're fine. No harm, no foul, really, under most cases. If the bit that gets complicated is that things aren't really a list of things. They're usually a list of related information. They are shop locations with products, or they are towns with sort of sub-spawn points or whatever. Now, the way you traditionally do that in a more complex system is some sort of SQL database where you have all of these relational stuff and you're going whatever, but that's crazy. Like, you don't need that for a few thousand items or whatever. And you also have a hard time then having to atomize all your stuff into crazy whatever. The thing about document databases is you just nest things. So it's the philosophical difference is if you use a document database over a SQL database, the implication is you duplicate your data, but you do it so it's fast lookup per context. So if I'm doing something where I'm loading guilds, and guilds have different members. I don't have to say for each guild find guild, then for each member find guild associated and get me list of members of guild. I would literally just store all the guilds with all of their members as sub elements, and so it's a chunk, it's a larger chunk, and when I read that single entity, I'm reading more information in. But there's going to be very few times I won't be reading just that. I would be reading that whole thing as one chunk. When
I'm not sure I understand that. What member data would you have there other than just the?
Well, even member data is kind of irrelevant to me. What I mean is like hierarchical data structure. So in JSON, in fact, you can have elements with sub-elements and children. My point is, if you store it in a flat database, instead of a normal SQL database, you will make tables for each individual entity. Sure. My point. So even if you take the example of a table of people and a table of guilds, and you would have some ID that matches one to the other. My point with any JSON file is you don't need to do that. You could literally have a single list of guilds, and then the sub element is called members, and they have a sub list of all the members in it. My point is you can literally store that directly inside of something like SQLite, like DB. But the difference is, unlike a JSON file where you'd have to read the whole thing in yourself and find it, you can actually run queries against a BSON-based like DB and index in. You could say, find all of these where has member, whatever. It's still a search, it's still a lookup, but the way the data structure works is it'll read it, it'll split it up into BSON, sort by lines, and you're loading less to memory. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that gets really complicated into the details. But my point is if it's a data set that changes, that has a hierarchical nested structure, that's not complicated enough to require a full broken out relational database, I would use something like DB. If it's just a couple of files of things, I would use normal stuff. But the problem I usually get at is when it's either dynamic lists. So if it's a list of items like products in a shop or something, or you're changing, you want a way to add and remove from that easily, and you want a way to read index at random access. And if you're storing all of your stuff as a giant spat out JSON file, you'll have a headache reading that back in. Now it requires large numbers. I think I gave examples before. I did this in Unity with a single JSON file with 1 billion items. It was around 3 gig just to test where the limits were. And of course, it would crash every time I tried to read it. And then I tried multiple variations of how I might approach this. I tried using stream readers with a 4K byte limit. I tried all these different stuff. I then used memory mapped files. I did all these different variations just to see where the cap was. And I could eventually read it and get it to work. But I was having to use like parallel forerunners with again the 4 byte limit per thing running X amount in parallel, and I could probably get it around 6 megabytes a second read off the disk. Obviously not ideal, but the point is I was just seeing where the caps were on some of this stuff, and it just comes to the conclusion that in most cases the reason people have issues with saving in Unity, in my opinion, is they're trying to have this like read-only universe where the scriptable objects are read-only and files are read-only, and they're trying to find a way to like take the data, read it and save it to a file, then read it back and reconstitute. A database though is a collection of stuff. It's like you put it in, you get it back out. It's more conducive to live data than something like this idea of a stateful file. So I use stateful files like JSON for like state. And if I have things like items, as soon as you tell me 1,000 items, I don't think 1,000 items. I think a collection state that is most likely to change. So why am I going to be working with that in a context that represents a frozen state static file? This is less like the right answer and more philosophically how people choose to do it. That's just I as soon as we get into lists of items, I'm like, I'd rather slap a single DLL in there for SQLite or keep saying SQLite for LightDB and just like run 4 or 5 lines of code to index into it. And all of these have data mappers. So I can just write the class and say, save file. I don't have to think about database structures or create tables or any of that stuff. And it'll do the auto indexing for you as well. I don't have to make a GUID and index stuff. As long as it's in the database, as long as I've marked a field as being the index, it'll automatically add entries when I add them. It allows me to do transactional analysis, so I can start a transaction and write a bunch of stuff and close the transaction. Again, databases are designed for data. And so usually I find that's a solution that makes more sense than cobbling together.
I feel it depends on what your data is. If you've got lots of items and you're changing those items and they're not, then certainly, especially if I got like a team of designers and they're making items, I don't want to do that all in scriptable objects in a database or some other system that's then pushing it into data. Makes more sense. But for the persistence stuff, in this case, definitely I would stick with the simpler Andrew setup here for saving these out.
And just to be clear, like I say, what I do is not what I recommend. Those two things. Exactly you asked the question, what would I do? And my answer is
no. I think it's totally.
In most cases, literally, in most cases, I would honestly say I'd create some kind of interface that says I can be saved, and it has a method that returns an object, and then I have something else which is a list of all of them and says for each thing with an I'm savable, get sub object, construct new object, and then spit that out into JSON.NET and pull it back in again. That's probably what I do in 99.9% of basic cases. It covers anything you really need. Sans the issues where you have to do typing because of the whole it has issues, but it works for most cases.
No, I agree. Yeah, so that's kind of like the starting point, and then you go to the more advanced ones once you get to that scale or have those issues. I used to default to that. Like I used to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go create a database and set this up, and I'd be like, well, I've got 30 fucking items. This is retarded. Like I didn't realize it was retarded, and I was doing it until afterwards. And I was like, I got this whole database. I have 30 items, and you have to go through this whole process to change the health on one item.
I agree with you for a SQL database, because for those who don't know, if you're setting up a SQL database, you have to do create table, define column headers, set all the stuff, create relations, create the primary keys,
set up some interface for your designers to get into it.
Here's my use case where I'm saying if I want objects and I know I'm going to have more than 100 of them, I drop in a DLL called lightdb.dll. I then go to my code and I say create a class called item, and then I say using lightdb db.insert object
item.
And when I want it back, I say get by ID. So it's to me, it's equal lines of code, if not less, than I would do with the JSON.NET serializer for my own thing. So when it's more mess, I agree with you. But when we're at the point where because even that's got its issues. It's not perfect, but BSON is smaller than JSON. It's better access for random access into it. So it's not like I'm substituting one for the other. I'm doing something that takes me as many lines, if not less, and provides better memory management, can be run in parallel, does support multiple items, does support code access, can be done atomically, does have transaction analysis. It's a very hard argument.
Can't be human read.
No,
that is your one downside.
But I can double click it and open it in a reader I have on my machine, which brings it up in a database, and I can play with it. And if I wanted someone else to play with it, I can write a command line application in 10 lines of code that would read some other JSON file into that, and I could suddenly do it all in a secondary. There's ways and means past that point. If I was building tooling, obviously that's a different conversation past that point.
Just real quick, the follow-up question here, Andrew, on this one. Do you have some way for your scriptable objects to add those IDs to the table or add those entries in?
I do. If I show this code, let me zoom in a little bit here. That's ridiculously small. So as Alon was saying, I have a scriptable object singleton class here, which essentially it when you call it, it builds itself, but it also in the editor will create its own object. So you don't have to, if you were to delete this object from your project, it would automatically just recreate. You can't get rid of it. What's wrong with you? And then my game modules repository inherits from that. And the way I do it here is on validate, really. Where it's I have to scroll more. Here we go. So on validate, we do this magical thing called populate all, which just populates all the different objects I want to populate and saves them all. If they're already there, great. If they're not, they're not. There's other ways to do this, of course. I could have code that every time you create a new one, it adds it to this. However, that means that I also need to handle what happens when somebody brings one in from another project.
Or deletes one.
Yeah, so we just do this, and it just means every time it's on validate, it will go through, and it doesn't take that long. So.
And I assume it just scans the project for everything that uses that script and adds it to the list, essentially.
Yep, it goes through. Let's see. I can make this a little bit. Well, I can try and make this one.
Or adds it to the dictionary of dictionaries by. Yeah, it's got a list.
Yeah. So what is it doing here? It's going through somewhere here. There's looks for all the here we go. Game modules objects. So this is the actual meat of that. It goes through the asset database, finds all of that type, and this is the utilities class. So it basically goes through the asset database for that type of object.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, it's very similar to what I've done in a lot of projects in the past. Just get an ID and then put them all in there and then map it up, especially for multiplayer ones. But the multiplayer ones, I try to keep everything ID'd by a byte so I can minimize the amount of data without having to optimize it later.
Cool. Yeah.
Nice.
This is an interesting but slightly different approach than I would take. So what I typically do is I have kind of I don't use scriptable objects that much, so I guess maybe it's a moot point. But the whole idea is I have some sort of data layer where I store my data in the code, and each one of these objects, which are typically organized in some sort of hierarchy, has a serialized and deserialized method. And so there's kind of an observer that goes through all of these and then turns that into some form of text that then can be written and read from disk. And it's not holistic like this, but it gives you a lot of flexibility to say, okay, this object's going to decide which properties are important for it to go and serialize, and then figure out how it's going to deserialize those objects.
What's your return? So this is an interesting one. So I've had this debate a few times, and I've been on the fence. I do that as well in places, but the bit I always struggle with myself on is what is the contract of that interface? Is it an object? Is it a string? Is the string pre-coded as being a JSON format? Is it a dictionary of key value pairs of whatever properties assignments? Again, just a generic object. At some point, you have to pay the piper in terms of serializing and deserializing types. Where do you do that? Do you return the type with it? Do you purely have an object being managed internally per object? Or do you have some sort of serializer object that lets you split out between XML or CSV? Where do you prefer to do that logic, and who do you want to give that control to?
It depends on how you're serializing. So I like to keep things simple. And so if let's say I'm using JSON serialization, I will just pass a JSON object through to the thing that's getting deserialized. So I deserialize the whole thing. I get a root JSON object. I pass that to my root object. It takes care of the things that it knows about and passes on the object it doesn't know about to its children. And it goes on that way.
And do you use JSON.NET or the default Unity one?
I use JSON.NET typically for my own projects. I also have for one of the other assets I didn't talk about. So JSON.NET's a little bit slow if you're doing it frequently. I think for serialization, deserialization is fine for files. But I have a faster version for a web service that I use.
Yeah, we're about the same thing. And then I guess my last question would be regarding the configuration settings on something like JSON.NET. Do you do type handling, or do you basically just cast it yourself when inside the objects themselves when you're reconstituting?
No,
so
I write
like you serialize the type.
If I'm doing C#, I will write the struct for the objects and then have JSON.NET turn it into that type and annotate the fields correctly so it does it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. By the way, I don't have an opinion on what's right or wrong. I'm just because this one's always fascinating because you can do it anyway. Like it's more a matter of where you want to pay the piper on certain stuff, and like those kinds of castings can cost performance, but at the same time, it's super flexible for adding new elements. And then there's trade-offs on even using JSON for save files. Some people say that you should just write straight bytes yourself, but then you've got issues with the default binary serializer is now currently a security risk, and so you'd have to write your own. And if you're writing your own, you're going to have to start dealing with salts and hashes. And now you're getting into like there's no right answer to any of this. It's purely just how do people like approaching it.
If you really want to get into the complexity of it, what do you do when you have a new version of your data? You've added some fields in an update. Are you still able to deserialize the old version? If you get into anywhere near binary territory, that becomes very scary. But if you do, JSON is okay at it, but you still need to figure out what is data, what is new data, what is the version of my file. With databases, I do think it does get a little bit easier there because you're not altering the whole structure of the file. You're altering, you're adding a column to a database.
Yeah, although there is the conflicting problem there where if you are using JSON and you have like a version ID field in your large data set, if you're storing the entire state of the game, you have to load an entire file to read effectively the number 2 to realize, oh no, I should use the other loader. And so you would want to read that line by line or various other things. So when it comes to versioning, my solution is the classic header bytes. I literally would just write 3 bytes to the top of my, but it doesn't matter what even if it's a JSON file, it'll cause some weird artifacting if you open it in a JSON reader, but it's not going to cause any problems. It just leads to some weird junky looking stuff at the front. But what it will do is it means no matter what your file is, the first thing you can do is say, is my first byte my magic word? And is my second byte my version number? And I can then opt to not read the entire thing, or which also adds backwards compatibility because a lot of people ask about that. Rather than rewriting my reader for a save file, I will always write a second one. reader v1, reader v2, and then you basically read the head byte and just read in whichever type. You can then make the philosophical question about whether you downgrade one or upgrade one, or whether you add extra missing fields, or whether you consider them incompatible. But that to me should be a game design question and not a like systems tool question. That should be, I'll just read the file in the format I know, and I'll resolve that as my project has changed over time. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Alan,
oh, hey, you're muted.
Sorry, I said it just depends on how you're deserializing the data, I think. Because if all you care about is like, I can deserialize JSON and then my objects can take care of it from there, and I just treat it as a dictionary, then you could just read it once and look at the version number at each layer of the observation. If you are deserializing it into structs, it becomes more complicated, right? Because those structs can change.
You could also choose where that happens too, right? Like one good example is you could have spawned weapons in a generator could all be the JSON struct you're describing, and they get all fed into the weapon manager. And the weapon manager could take all of that data, encode it into bytes for all it cares, and then save a completely different format than the actual format that you're internally using for something else. So there doesn't even have to be a right answer across the board. It can be sort of, as long as you can pipe things up in the right direction to what you're doing, there's a million ways to handle it. A good example is I hate the way JSON.NET, or well, all JSON serializers default to vectors. They store, because a vector stores not only the X, Y, Z, but it stores the full qualified bits with the magnitude and other nonsense. So I have my own serializers. Now, I could write my own thing and do it all manually, but they have a converter collection. And so I have a static global converter collection that I use. There's nicer ways to do it, but it's easier. I just want a place where I can say add globally as a way of converting between these types. And I write a custom version, which is literally an array of 3 values, or 2 values, or 1 value. So my vector is actually just an array, regardless of 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I just read the start array, close array, count numbers, and then return array type of that size for each one. So I can write the same line of code in the minimal amount of, individual elements for an array, which at scale in something like Unity, where you're saving millions of arrays and millions of quaternions, like the amount of characters you save, I'm talking like 40% of the file size drops if you're storing like a lot of positional sizes. So yeah, even stuff like that is questionable. And again, even that could be shrunk vastly smaller if you're storing it in bytes or whatever. But normally I find just custom JSON converters tends to do 90% of what I need,
Yeah, that's a great idea. Like I would say you should never serialize a type you don't write unless you have a custom converter.
Yeah. And then of course there's types you can reconvert back to as well. Like, do you need to store data that you're able to reconstitute? Things like magnitude values. Yes, technically you can, it is a saved piece of data, but you could also just load in the 3 values and have it reconstitute readable fields or whatever else. And so those kinds of things are another question.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So did you guys come up with the final solution while I was gone?
Yeah, and we all decide that you should tell girls in advance that you're into games.
So you were all wrong. Got it. My wife will confirm that you're all wrong. Okay. Cool. I don't mean to change the topic. Was there more on this one, or did you guys want to go on to the next question?
I think we can move on. That was
we covered that quite in deep, I think.
All right, so this one was about Andrew, and it was something Andrew actually wanted to talk about. So I thought it was a good one to pop up, saying, I saw Andrew playing with Muse AI earlier this morning in my time zone. So early this morning, our time zone, maybe too. I don't know. I would love to know more about Muse AI's behaviors. Could you compare it to Optiv's behavior designer asset? And this is about the Muse behavior asset, right? Which is the behavior tree that also has some Muse integration.
Yes. Although this is one of the things I was confused about. You don't need Muse, the subscription, or AI to use Muse behavior. Muse behavior is a standalone thing. I have not used it, but there is AI integration in terms of you can say stuff and then the AI will try to build that behavior tree for you.
Yes.
So I haven't used that. I wasn't using that. So I was actually not using Muse AI. I was using Muse behavior, which didn't have the AI stuff turned on. So it was just a behavior tree. What's interesting, I can't compare it to Behavior Designer because even though I own Behavior Designer, I've never actually used it.
Okay.
I tried this one out just because it was top of mind, and so I figured let me give it a try. But what's intriguing about this, and I don't think the other behavior designers do this, or behavior tree assets like Behavior Designer do this, is they've got this story concept where you kind of write out human readable things. What does this node do? And then you can assign each word to a variable in the Blackboard. So, you could be like, self looks for a new target within sight range distance, and then assign 3 variables. And then the script that it creates for that node has those 3 variables exposed. And then you go and you write you script it out. And that was the whole thing. Is I've only used it a few times this week, and I got confused a few times. I got turned around a few times. There's not really any documentation. So I struggled with trying to figure out how to get access to the game object that owned the behavior tree, like in this case, a flying eye. And there was a method called game object, which seemed exactly to be that, but it just wasn't working. So I don't know if that's a bug. But then I noticed in their example, rather, they just pass a reference directly to it where they have self is the thing. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll do that. So I got over that hurdle, but that, took like 25 minutes of me just looking at it thinking, this makes no sense. It clearly should be this, and this obviously should be this, but it's not working. All in all, it's very interesting. It's definitely changing my brain about how I would go about doing behaviors, which are never easy. Behaviors are not easy, especially if you want to be complex about it and you want to be like, well, this NPC could be friendly, but it could also be hostile, or it could be neutral until it gets attacked or something else happens. So maybe it's, one of all, could be anything.
Yes, in some of those cases, you can just swap out the behavior too.
Well, that's one of the things. But once you're in a behavior tree zone, you have to go to a different tree. So you can do a subgraph, maybe.
You can, or you could just swap it completely.
Or you swap it completely.
Yeah, depending on how that state changes. If it's a permanent change, like they're going from ally to enemy or whatever, you just change it out.
Go back. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can imagine a magic spell that makes them not hostile for 30 seconds, and makes them afraid of you for 30 seconds. So now they're afraid, so they run away. There's so many different complexities that I'm trying to figure out I'm really just playing around with it, trying to see what I can do. And it's very interesting how it breaks everything down to really bite-sized pieces. Every little thing should just be one little thing. But then I kind of think, okay, but I know I'm going to add all these other things in a few minutes. So that means I have to do this differently. It gets complicated in its own unique way. It's supposed to make it less complicated, and it does. But it adds a different type of complication, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've been back and forth on this one, and I've really flip-flopped, and I've come to a probably unpopular opinion on some of it. Is I've watched so many video essays, like on how many different people have done it differently, what are different systems, and how have Valve done it, and how have different game studios done it, and what are their solutions for this, and how flexible are certain systems. And I keep coming back to the fact that whenever you hit a certain deadline where some of this stuff is like general trash mobs versus, say, bigger characters or bosses or various things, I've realized that a lot of the times people will just make a script for that problem. A good example is I was looking at the code base behind games like Tunic, and there's that one Death's Door, and I was looking at their frog boss, and they just have a like base boss script thing, but the majority of it's a unique code for this sequence of steps that the boss does his behaviors. And it's so nice to just read a single file that's just a structural switch cases of the various different scenarios. And I was just like, you know what? You could build this using a 50-part, wait until, arrive at, pause, delay, do this, that, and the other. And technically it's more malleable, but the question becomes, are you really getting much from it? And so what I settled on personally is for the first 5 entities or more, I will just hard code a script with their name on it. I won't even have a base thing unless I really need it. And then once I start getting into the like, are we play testing? Are we making like variant mobs for various reasons? I would then say, what would a variant mob of this look like? And I won't make a base enemy. I might have the interface or whatever for various hooks into damage and things, but I won't do it from like a design perspective. And then I'll just make a base thing for that thing, like, you know, base dragon or whatever. And then I will make all of the variants I need. And so I'll basically be hard coding for as much as possible, because my opinion on this was changed talking to designers. As a programmer, my instinct was to go,
can I interrupt you for half a second? My wife came in and I have to ask her this question, then we'll get back. Can you come here? So
Yes.
If you're trying to get a girlfriend, should you tell her that you like to play lots of board games?
No, definitely not.
You should tell her that later after you've already caught her?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. See, I told you. Okay. Sorry. I didn't want to interrupt, but she's going to run off and I knew I wouldn't be able to get her again. And I also agree with you a lot on this hard coding stuff. And it's like that in most games, but continue on.
Yeah. My general point is to say that I used to go straight for the modular stuff and have like infinite systems of modular whatever. But then I realized in reality, if you're building a system, a good thing like a character controller with like a new kind of jump or a boss with a new kind of weapon or ability, it's not just it's really handy, I can drop the block button in here and change the particles. Oftentimes it requires some level of design. Like you're going to need somebody to decide, you know, game states and bosses and characters and movement. And by that stage, you're involving the audio team, you're involving the art team. And oftentimes there's enough time there to write the extra bloody 10 lines of code or 12 lines. And at that stage, it's often easier to sit and look at these components and stack them. So all of this to say, my short solution is that I came to the conclusion that you're better off with composition over inheritance. So rather than building a thing that's a stack of an array of behaviors that can be ran through in various cases, I would literally just write helper classes that's like projectile launcher. And if I have to instantiate a projectile launcher inside of an enemy and then call like load up bullets and fire stuff or whatever, I can do that. It's still reusing a lot of the similar concepts, but I'm not like having to build it out of these modular blocks as much. Obviously, we get into different territories when we start talking about compound behaviors in things like utility AI and like much more hyper-specific whatever. But I just mean on a broad level, if I've got enemies in game, you will get very far by just writing crow.cs for the crow character, dragon.cs for the dragon character, and try to get as much mileage out of that as possible until you start getting into the really nitty-gritty design phases, and you want to be able to iterate really fast on like bullet speeds and, you know, rates of delays between hits, you know, hit damage and flashes or whatever. So
Oh yeah, and I think Steven called it out really well right here too. Hard coding is good to get something working. Abstraction comes after you kind of know what you're building and where it overlaps and kind of when it's needed. Because I think like when you're talking about a story, you put in these systems and these abilities and characters and stuff or whatever to combat things. If that's all you needed and the hard coded part is good enough and it's done and it works, that's the end of it. You're done. And then if it's not, like I can think of a scenario of a couple different teams that I know that build MMOs, and what they'll usually do is they start by hard coding stuff. They hard code out the different things, and then once they figure out kind of where those things overlap, eventually a programmer goes back and kind of re-engineers that into a flexible system so the designers can reuse that functionality and mix and match it, because in those games they're going to create thousands of NPCs and need all this variation. But if you don't need that variation, then building out that system that allows you to create 1,000 NPCs and then making 10 is just a giant waste of time. And it's like one of those, you know, engineering masturbation acts where you're just making stuff because it's cool, but you don't actually need it. Doesn't solve the problem. Yeah.
Plus, you get into this like scenario where, again, I've done it myself, where you want the super awesome mega system. And so say you've got a character who walks around the day doing their day job, and then at some point they set up shop, and then they set up a shop you can buy stuff from. And then if you happen to attack them, they turn into an enemy you could fight. You could try to write the really big graph system that supports all of these cases, or you can write 3. You could write blacksmith underscore day pattern, blacksmith underscore shop mode, and blacksmith underscore fight mode. And you just wait for the moment something happens. You copy the animation frame and you swap the entire object out, match the position, and off you go. And you've made your life infinitely easier because you don't have to deal with this huge rat's nest of mid-phase changing and stuff. So even boss phases, sometimes you'll have bosses with 3 phases. You could try and manage what happens all of these sub phases, or just write 3 scripts: boss phase 1, boss phase 2, boss phase 3, and spawn in the appropriate thing under a cloud of smoke, and it's fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
My big thing here is now I'm thinking, I know it, like I was talking to a colleague who knows this pretty well, and she was just saying, yeah, mix and match if you want to. And that's what I think I'm going to end up doing. Like I'm trying to figure out when I want to use a behavior tree, when that makes sense to me, right? And when it makes more sense just to do it myself. Like, you know, it just I don't want to go down a spaghetti factory, right, with the behavior tree that just cascades from one node to like a billion down below. That
I
seems
think you just make one for your combat stuff. Like make one for your NPCs that are going into combat, and maybe one for your player controller, depending on how you decide to set that up. And that's probably it. And then maybe add in a couple later for different NPC types. But yeah, I would just probably create a basic one for your NPCs. They run around, they fight, they attack if they get in range, they use spells if they have them, they run away if they're feared, and they stop if they're stunned. Kind of stuff like the basic combat. And really quickly, I wanted to mention on the OpSiv one. So it does do a lot of those same things, kind of like you'd mentioned that the Muse one does. But one of the things that it does better, it's not free. It is on sale though, it looks like. One of the things that it does better than the others is it has a lot of pre-done examples and integrations. So you can kind of see, if you want an AI that runs and takes cover and all that stuff, they've got that kind of already done.
The army too. It has formations and all that as well.
Yeah.
I admit it's one of my favorite of the systems on the store. Personally, my favorite is one called Node Canvas. But I wouldn't say it's because it's amazingly better. It's just the one I prefer because it's it comes down to how opinionated it is. Behavior Designer is about solving problems for you, specifically around AI. Like they have a lot of AI stuff done for you. Node Canvas is just, do you write code? Does that code have states? And do you sometimes want to visualize that? And it'll just wrap all of that in the providing you match our contract, will let you stack your scripts, call them in groups, display them in whether it's FSM or in different kind of behavior trees. And it doesn't do anything past that point. So it's kind of in the same way that kinematic character controller is technically a character controller, but it's really just a physics resolver. I would say Node Canvas is really just a node drawer more than anything else. It has a lot of great features.
You can build the behavior on top, right?
Yeah. And that's what I want. I don't want to write my own node system, but I also don't want no features, because if I was to write my own, I'd have to like handle debugging and drawing the lines and changing colors. I don't want to waste all my time. So Node Canvas gives me a lot of state management. It's very easy to work with. And I can also write custom nodes. So I was working with one project where I literally made notes or nodes that would be things like teleport to planet, open up inventory, do these things that were like hyper specific, but I wrote them myself using my own systems that would hook into my stuff. And then designers could go in and open a graph that's actually only 12 nodes. But if they want to like queue line of dialogue, they could just drop dialogue line, attach. And so I basically made these master nodes on top of the existing stuff that worked for what I needed.
Nice. Yeah, I've done some of that myself, and it's a lot of work. So I would recommend do that if you need it, but stick with behavior designer type stuff. Or Muse behavior, you can get it for free, and then the AI generation. I think behavior designer was talking about they added something similar, or we're adding something similar to do generation of the behaviors in there. But I haven't checked that part out yet. I was actually working on doing a conversion of the AI in my game over from my handwritten state machines to behavior designer, and I started working on it, but I haven't finished that conversion yet. But there was a question here, Jason, about VR stuff. I don't know if you have an answer. They're wondering, they're building a VR door and they want a squeaking sound and they want it based on movement, but they can't figure out how to approach it. So assume it's like, you're moving it, opening it and closing it, you make a little squeak.
There's like a lot of ways to do that. I guess it's one of those, what I would do, followed by what I'd recommend, I guess. What I would do is I would set a start and end point for the door as like a rotational position on the, I would child object so that there's a pivot that's very clearly the rotating pivot for the door. I would set a start and end point for those two positions as vectors hard-coded or Eulers for the rotations. I would do a distance check between the two for the current thing, and I would end up with a straightforward 0 to 1 that represents how far it's moved along that point. I would then store a standard acceleration and velocity variable, and just while door is being interacted with, I would tick a number up, and I would basically give myself a rough, is it being moved, so that it won't just squeak normally. And so then I would use that value to represent the volume / pitch squeaking of the 0 to 1 slider of the thing, and then I'd play a sound that's like the full squeak, and then that would give me both variations. So it'll play the one sound, but then it would also change based on how strong you're doing it. And then, because I'd probably be using Fmod, I would send those values. I wouldn't even do the code in Unity. I'd send it to Fmod, and then the sound designer would be able to make like heavy bang, light bang, tweak it, and then they'd be able to know know because I would have sent them the two variables they would need: the velocity of the door and the position along the opening. So you could even have it like sound different closing versus opening if it's like a seal from a space station or something. But you don't need all that complexity in 90% of cases. What you probably can get away with is run an animation and literally just play a sound on things start. If you do want the full gradation, literally the simplest solution that works, I've done this before, is just cheat. Use the hand, because the hand has velocity already calculated for you by Oculus and the other whatever solution you're using. So literally, I would say on interact with door, hand interactor to do door. So door now has a reference to interactor. I would then do a get component on the door interactor, the hand, and say if it is player or hand, get velocity of moving object. Use that as my guide, and then just create an arbitrary min max for that, and then basically play my sound varied by that velocity sound. Yeah, entirely depends. And a lot of the libraries will even do that for you. There's some of them, I don't know if it's been a while, but some of the VR libraries out of the box already have support for some of these different solutions. They already have these like velocity-based transference and stuff in there. And if you want to get really fancy with it, if you're using something like the Quest 3 or Quest Pro, they have this entire thing called Haptic Designer. And Haptic Designer is a separate application you download that lets you put your audio files into it, and it will generate the pulse from the reverb of the object based on the sound files, and you can play both at once. So you can do things like feel an ice cube shaking in the glass when you hold it, because it'll actually bounce relative to the sound files and stuff. So you can actually design not just the squeak of the movement, but actually pass in the velocity curves from the pressure and stuff like that too. So yeah, you can be as simple or as complex as you like, but broadly 0 to 1 slider is my go-to answer for all of these. If you've ever got anything that has a curved thing, I go 1, can I turn it into 0 to 1? And then 2, can I get some level of like engagement speed or pressure or something? So I have 2 numbers to work with. How much and which range? And beyond that point, you can do anything. You can completely play animations, you can jump to certain step frames. So yeah, I always limit things down to those 2 things. Can I get 0 to 1 number, and can I get some relative pressure or scale? And then I can play with that later.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Keep it simple. Nobody will notice when you make it complicated. Everybody will just think that it's bugged or something because it's more complicated. So there was another suggestion here, wondering if it's possible for us to check out people's games, have people submit their games that they've made and check them out and talk about them. I think that would definitely be fun. I don't know if you guys want to do that sometime. Maybe
I've done a few game jams and I love it. In fact, I go a little bit overboard on a few things. Lovebird Labs here knows, because they asked me to help with the Ukraine one. I'll go full Obsidian. I'll have like a table with automatic scripts, and I'll run through the stuff and I'll write my notes as I go. And great. So yeah, personally, I'm a big fan of doing stuff. If people want to do reviews on things, you'll get feedback from me happily. But be warned, you'll get lots of feedback, and it'll be often quite harsh. So I have strong standards for myself and for others. So it'll just be aware if you go down.
Maybe we should do like a thing and have people bring their previous game jam projects or whatever, so they don't have to do a new one. They bring their existing game jam project or their real project and do like a big review thing. That would be fun. Let's talk more about that and see if we can figure something out for that in the next couple weeks. I think that would be really exciting. And I think Story would be great at that. And there were 2 things that I wanted to ask you all about before we start to wrap stuff up. The first was, and I don't know if anybody's going to have an answer for this, but I'm just kind of asking around to see what kind of ideas I get. If you were building Club Penguin today, how would you go about it? What would you do for your network infrastructure? I have lots of ideas in my head, but I'm curious to looking for wild other ideas. So say you wanted to build Club Penguin, you want 1 million active players that run around and emote at each other and go down slides. And then occasionally go play mini games. Anybody got thoughts?
No clue.
Opinions?
My lazy answer would be something like Firebase, or just check whatever AWS's latest stack is, and because they've got such a nice variety of like constant connections versus event topics, I wouldn't know which ones I'd pick for which problems. But once you're into that architecture and you connect your game to it, you can basically answer those questions ad hoc as they come up. So probably Firebase or AWS was broadly my answer, but I wouldn't know. It would be per problem, I guess.
Okay. It's not an uncommon answer. Just looking. If anybody in chat has opinions on that too, I'm just curious, trying to see. Like I said, looking for some of the more wild ideas. If there's anything I haven't thought of yet. And then the second one, I know you're going to have lots of thoughts on, Jason. Well, I know you had thoughts on it last time. So let me show you again. I've been working on the game, and this is a little test level just to demonstrate some basic functionality as I work through the UI. Can you see my screen? The game window?
Yeah.
No, it's not showing. Okay, hold on. It didn't share. It did that thing where it pops up and then disappears right when I click on it. Give it just a second. It's starting up. But yeah, I just wanted to run by the latest version of the user interface plan that I'll probably knock out this weekend, and then see what you think, and what other feedback you might have. But I don't know if it's going to start now, because normally I always tell everybody that it starts up nice and fast for me, but then I go to demo and it takes 30 seconds. And he's like, okay, 40 seconds. Come on. I need to restart it.
Yeah, I was just curious what it was, and you're saying all of opinions on it, and you're like UI. It's like, oh, there you go. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Always a strong opinions on UI stuff.
Yeah. So it is something I think you'll have some strong opinion. Okay. So bam. Again, placeholder, work in progress stuff. But as you can see, I've got Andrew's Medusa there.
Nice.
Trying to kill off Andrew's mummy. If I can click on it. Turning it to stone and stopping him from animating. And then eventually steal his ability, so I can turn into a mummy. So my plan now, whoops, I changed the camera view, fucked it up, was to put the different roles on the side. I think I might put them down here, though, as small things instead, so that you have all of the different souls that you can swap between down there in the bottom, but then have the current one and the refresh on it and everything slightly bigger. And then on the left, I'm going to put this is going to be a pop-up menu for all of the spawners. So for everybody who doesn't know, the game is going to be kind of a mix of a MOBA like League of Legends, a team fight tactics, and a kind of a Clash Royale. So you can spawn and drop guys at spawners, and you're going to do that through here. They'll be placed out through the world. This is one of them that can right now only spawn towers. Here, let's spawn a tower there. Boom, bam. So you'll be able to click and control which different units you spawn and put those out. And you actually can in the other maps. I just don't have any spawners sitting in this one yet. And I was thinking on the left side, I would do the UI for spawning guys. So you click on it, and then all your spawners are basically here. And then it pops up, shows you what's set to spawn, or I'm not sure if I want to have them auto spawn or just click to spend the money and it spawns right there. So that way you don't have to go away, or you can do hotkeys on them. So you can go like one, and then it would pop up the hotkeys, and you could.
Yeah, well, my instinct would be to have a little icon of a circle of like an arrow to itself, and then that would be in the top right corner. And if you either press the shortcut key or click that, you basically locked it in as saying, I want this to auto spend, versus unclick it, it's not, you know.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, like an auto option or just a click to spend option. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So yeah, I was thinking the spawners would be over here. Towers, I'm still not sure exactly how I want to spawn them right now. I have them just spawning on spawn points that just get marked as tower only. But I was thinking maybe just allow like a free form tower dropping, so that you can build a tower wherever you want, as long as it's on a walkable area that can be attacked, and then just making it be like a little process that, you know, maybe takes 10 or 15 seconds while the tower goes up and takes your money. So there's a little bit of investment. It's not just click and go instant spawn it, but you can put it wherever you want. And then when it gets destroyed, people get the resources for it. So if you put it over too close in a spot where it's easily destroyed, they basically just get to steal your stuff.
Well, I guess my first question is the 4 bars along the top. What are they for?
Those are just showing the. They don't work in this mode right now, but they're showing the health of each person's like main base crystal thingy, and the number of units that they have spawned for each player. So the number there is just how many units are spawned, so I can see it, and then that's the health of their crystal thingy. Eventually, I'd like to have it just on a mini map where you can kind of see all of the players and their stuff.
Yeah, I guess Individually, there's nothing wrong with any individual elements. You're fine. The problem you're going to run into, though, is the density of information versus the screen real estate you have. And so something that I talk about a lot is the concept of context. And it's not just context from a like, am I in build mode versus am I in like running around mode? There's also context in weight of value of information. What I mean by that is if you've got, say for example, you've got 5 towers and nobody's touching them. They're completely presently not being attacked. All of that weight is both equal information, but also useless because it's not really telling you anything. If one of those towers gets attacked, suddenly it's like, oh, this is weighing more now conceptually. And then if one of them gets to half health, that's very important to you. So personally, what I like to see is things like a compressed sidebar, which just shows 4 green dots or 4 like highlighted thing. And then if one of the towers goes below 50%, it takes one of them and then like shows that one as like this one followed by the 3 green dots. And so if there was some gradation that says, because if you, as you add more features, you're going to have more information, and you're never going to be able to succeed at getting all that information on screen in a clean way. It's why MMOs often copped out and would just give you dockable windows. They're like, you figure it out. We don't know the answer to your questions. You do it yourself. So you can either just make everything windows, or if you want to do it the quote unquote proper way, what you want to do is start having a gauge for what's valuable when. And in a lot of games with health bars, it comes down to player context. And so players' core context is I set things up and it should run by itself. And if something starts to be under pressure, I need to know that so I can make adjustments to my plan. And so the answer is, can you weigh, like going back to the 0 to 1 example, it sounds silly, but I would have threat levels for aspects of my game. Is lane 1 in trouble? Is lane 2 in trouble? Is my towers in trouble? And I would group my towers together, group their combined health, group it whether how many enemies are, whatever the information I want. And I would turn all of my game into these 0 to 1 like pressure thresholds. And then I would use that for UI elements to say, if lanes are fine, then I don't need much information about them. I would have a condensed view. But if this particular lane is in trouble, I would like purposely pop out a more valuable thing with a flashing indicator or something. So a lot of information in your game is going to be quite small. A good example is all the bars you've got in the bottom right. They're not going to change all of the time very often, but some of them might change a lot. And when they do, that's very valuable. So I would basically just make judgment calls about what I think is useful when. If I'm going to go place towers, maybe at that moment, that particular thing highlights more. If my enemies are moving really fast, then maybe I'll increase the size on certain elements. Again, it can get noisy and it can get very complicated, and I wouldn't normally recommend micromanaging all of this in one big go, but I will say with the level of, you're doing like multiple different genres and features together, the hard part you're going to hit is fitting all of that information on screen. So you've only got one of two options, either pagination. So what I would do, again, this is personally, I wouldn't even start with my own suggestion. What I would actually do is I would have 4 screens. I would have screen 1, which is tower defense type thing. Screen 2, which is like I'm running around doing stuff. Screen 3 is I want to know what the world is looking like outside of me. And I would have Alt 1, 2, 3. And I'd be able to really quick go, bang, okay, look at my state of my towers, bang, look at the state of my character and how they're running, and then go straight to the world view. And I'd live in one of them and then jump back and forth between the others as I need to. But that's not very user-friendly. That's a good power user solution. But I would start there because it's quicker to develop, fun for me to play. And then once I got into that space, I would have people play test and I would start to like fudge that into how can I condense this wall of information into like one bar saying, what is the state of our team? Is our team a thumbs up? And if that's the case, I don't need all the bars. But if I want more information, I can click the bar and get an expanded view or something. So yeah, there's a lot of questions there. So it's hard to know.
I like that answer. And I would also add, maybe just don't show the information. Like maybe for a gameplay reason, it might be more interesting if you don't know how your allies are doing without going and checking in on them. More mainly. But
I would say broadly context is the thing. Is I'm a big fan of like at any given time, there's only so much information a person can deal with, so I try to context everything. You know,
you got to give them lots and lots of text, right? Charts and graphs is what we need. That's what you're saying. More graphs. Just export the UI to Excel, all right? And you have to play with Excel on the side to see everything. All right, well, this was super helpful. I'm going to keep working on this stuff and have a couple updates, hopefully, for everybody this weekend. A couple people already have it on Steam now. I sent out a couple codes already. Anybody got anything else, final things for this week before we wrap up?
Nope.
One other thing just on that, because it's such a fun topic, we could honestly talk about that for hours. The other part to say, because I did talk about information, this is slightly tangential, but I think it's worth pointing out. All information is not equal, not just in terms of value, but in terms of what it applies to the game. And a really fun byproduct is that actually actively subverting that and hiding information can lead to more fun gameplay in certain places. A good example of this is a lot of the team-based games online specifically don't let you hear each other unless you're within range. What does that do? Well, it allows for a lot of panic when you can't hear things. In a game like this, depending on how much you want to foster creativity or people working together or macro management versus micromanagement or whatever, you can actively obfuscate on purpose. Another good example of this is in Gears of War. When you get damaged in Gears, the screen does the like blood red flash, but it doesn't do it at the edges. It does it on your cursor. And it does that on purpose because what happens is the cursor gets smaller and smaller until it completely covers the thing you're literally looking at. So it draws around your eye to get your attention. But then at some point it goes completely solid where it shows the logo instead of your pointer, because by that stage you should be ducking. In other words, we're blocking the literal thing you're shooting at because we're telling you if you don't move within a second, you're about to die. And so there's actually telegraphing on purpose. They're hiding information as a way of reminding you where your core focus should be. And so in a game like yours, you could have like maybe the entire teammates are not a concern for you. You should be microing your own stuff, but then maybe instead of giving all the information, you like start to glow something over the edge of the map saying, or there's like a rim around the top of the screen which starts to change color to indicate the who's currently in the winning phase, and so it pivots your perspective. So again, sometimes vague information forces people to engage in other ways. It means they have to start looking at the map more. They have to start contacting or engaging with the chat functions. So it's not just about how much information or show all of it. And I only bring this up to say, because we had this conversation in our last show, where programmers will always look at what information they have and surf it to the screen. That's the default. Every programmer will go, I have these numbers, I'll give you these numbers.
That's right. The name, the label, the text.
And if they're good, they'll take those numbers, hide some of them, choose some priority and put them on screen, and that's better. But the idea of hiding information or taking it away is unthinkable. The idea that they don't need to show all the stuff available. So thinking about it, because that can be gameplay itself. So thinking about what information leads to the best user experience is a different question than what information you have. And so it's worth taking that extra layer sometimes and going, maybe all this information is actually not helpful. Maybe it would be better if the enemy team was only indicated by a red dot or a flashing color or something. It might not be as satisfying for people who like numbers, but it might lead to a better gameplay experience because you'll stop micromanaging health bar numbers and start thinking instead about macro combat. Or the other way around. Maybe you don't show the macro combat, but you do show the health bars because you want them focusing on. Again, depends on your gameplay, but my point is information is a mechanic in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree. I need to get better at that part. Helen said, what about an intro screen and story cut line? That'll be coming eventually once I have a finalized idea of what the gameplay looks like. I got to make sure that I'm pulling out all the fun parts and then removing all the stuff that I end up not liking that I think will be fun. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap it here today. We'll be back next week, same time. If you're not subscribed already, go hit the subscribe button and thumbs up and all that. If you didn't check out the spring sale, the link is right there. And Andrew and Powell both have some things. Is Flexiline in the spring sale by chance?
No, but Proxima is the other asset I didn't talk about.
Can you tell everybody what that one is?
Sure. So Proxima is, so I don't know if you ever run into the situation where you've built the game and you've created a binary and you've shared it with people and you've hit a bug. Wow.
A bug? No, never happened.
Never heard bugs, right? But okay, so you've hit this bug and now what do? How do you debug that issue? Maybe it's something you only can reproduce after you've built the game, maybe only after you've deployed it to an iOS device or something. So Proxima lets you connect to that game and basically get a copy of the Unity editor in a web browser. So you can go in and tweak every component property and see the current state of everything, see the logs. So it's a really useful debugging tool. So this one's going to be on a flash for 6 days. So,
yeah, I've talked to multiple people who use and love Proxima. I haven't pushed out to any devices since it's been around, so I haven't had a use. But as soon as I do, I'm going to be using it because it seems freaking awesome. You basically like you're running in the editor on device.
Yeah, 90%.
I'm starting to favorite that Unity, the HTML starts to come into play.
But yeah, 90% of the time you don't need it because you're just iterating in the editor, and then you hit that one issue that you just can't debug, and this is the lifesaver.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's very, very cool. Add it if you haven't already added it to the wish list. Go put it in your cart now and get ready. It's 6 days. Yeah, yeah. Don't ship with it in there. Okay, cool. Well, I guess that's it for this week. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. And we will see you again next Friday. Oh, let me share there was one other link up. Bam. Share the course. We got a live call on Monday, 9 a.m. for the next multiplayer mastery course call. I'm sorry, getting my words all mixed up. And the code for the MOBA game is up for the students there as well, if you wanted to check that out. Also, I think in the next couple weeks, I'm going to be announcing some new non-multiplayer coursework content stuff, updating the beginner and intermediate stuff for everybody who wants to build things but doesn't necessarily care about multiplayer. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you like, subscribe, drop a comment. Let me know if there are any specific things that you want to learn. I've got a giant outline in my head, but I'm always open to more ideas. So drop those down below as well. And then we will see you next Friday. Anybody got any final words before I hit the button?
Enjoy the sun if it's sunny.
Oh, it's so cloudy here today. It's supposed to be sunny too.
Maybe later.
Any sun over there?
Yes. And it's warmer now. So it's nice.
Powell's got sun in his background.
Yeah, unfortunately, weather is mixed. Last week we had about 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. This week we have about 0 to 5.
Oh, that's different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh. All right. Well, I hope everybody gets some sunlight, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.